It's 4 o'clock on Thursday. No, it's 4 o'clock on Tuesday. You know what that means, don't you? It's time for Taxi's Quarantini Happy Hour. Woohoo! Today, coming to you live from Westlake Studios in beautiful Hollywood, California. Hello, everybody. It's appropriate that I'm here at Westlake because we are going to talk about mixing vocals and other such related stuff today. Hello, you guys in the chat room. Let's see. Are you getting me? Dan Weber just wet his pants. Really? Yeah, that's right. That's in my bedroom right there. Oh, man. Yep. Anyway, yeah, that's my new office at home. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. So today, well, let me do a little hello to the chat room. Ewert, Williams, Pat Warren, Music, Marion Laird, Bob Gunnerfeld, Dean Turner, Riney Bear, Peter Rahill, Andre Stepanian, let's see, who didn't I get yet? Alex Dillon, Greg Carosa, Chris Anderson, John Pearson. So the gang's all here. All right, yeah, that is the best bedroom studio ever. So we are going to talk about today, why can't I not remember his name? Tony, I want to say Carosa, but I know it's not Carosa. Because Greg Carosa is here. Oh, it's getting cold here in the control room. Let's go out in the backyard for a minute. There we are. Now we're in the backyard. Oh, man. And look, now we're in Israel. I'm having too much fun. Yes, I did. I bought a giant green screen, and I've been having so much fun with it. Although I'm a little on the tan side. I'm not really that tan. Let's go back to the control room for all the latecomers. Tony Salazzo, that's what I'm thinking of, sent in these questions the other day. I'm hoping he joins us. Yep, the green screen came. That is the Big Island. That was, I forget which hotel, Pat, but yep, one of the hotels on the Big Island. Taxi Travelogue, there you go. Anyway, yeah, this is a shot I actually took at Westlake Studios like 2 years ago when I was there for something. And I thought about putting up the tarpon picture, but somehow I thought the control room was a little more appropriate. I'm going to take a picture of the shot from home with my halo and have that available as well. Anyway, hello, Bonzo. How are you? Hello, Tom. And Terrell Burt. Anyway, there's some great questions in here, but you know, as I often say, it's all about context. So we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about context. So, Tony Salazzo sent this in, and he says, I found mixing vocals to be a challenge, easily taking many days to do. Comping multiple tracks into the best version, yeah, then adding some basic gate and compression to even it out is pretty straightforward. Bob's here for the reverb class, okay. But then he says, but then come all the decisions, how EQ/bright. So I'm guessing, how bright do I make it? How forward should I make the lead vocal in the mix? I'm kind of paraphrasing his questions here. How far back should I put the harmonies? How narrow or wide panned? How much reverb? What type of reverb? Why delay instead of reverb? How much sibilance is okay? How close to perfect pitch is required? What plugins to have in line on a track, when to send to a separate bus? All those questions are genre specific. Also, these questions are genre specific. I need to ask in context. Yay, my favorite word for pop versus country versus hip hop versus singer songwriter. These decisions won't just apply to vocals. Talk about choices for other instruments doing the final mix. Maybe you could bring out Logic and do a demo. Unfortunately, Logic is on the same computer I use to broadcast, and I think if I ran Logic and the broadcasting software, we wouldn't have a show. Otherwise, I'd be happy to make a fool out of myself. So there you go. Let me grab a little sip of this tea. Mint. What is it? Oh, no, it's like candy cane green tea. I'm guessing my wife brought that to the office. Not that good. Right, the answer to every one of those questions is it depends. And it absolutely does. Yeah, Andre says you can answer all that in an hour. No. I mean, I could just by saying it depends. Okay, so let's go down the list. How bright do you EQ something, or how do you EQ a vocal to make it work in the mix? It depends. Oh, I wish I had a sound effect for it depends. Do I have... There you go. It depends. Tony, I wish I had better advice for you, but you can't just get kind of yes/no answers, even though you do talk about the fact that you want to get it, hear what the differences are between pop versus country versus hip hop versus singer-songwriter. It depends on the song. It depends on the key. It depends on the tempo. It depends on the instrumentation. It depends on kind of the attitude you want to mix with. That really comes into play. Remember when I talked to Shirelli, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I brought up the issue of mixing with intent. And he went, wow, I never really thought of that, but you're absolutely right. I do. So that controls so much of it. It's just, there are no easy answers. The only answer I can tell you with absolute certainty is that when you do it for enough hours in enough different settings, in rock, pop, country, whatever, fast, slow, in a lower key, in a higher key, all those things. Once you do that stuff over and over and over, eventually it's just inside of you. I keep talking about the quiver full of arrows, and the arrows are your tricks, basically your skills. Better word than tricks. So, you can talk about how bright something is, but then again, what if you're doing like a Nora Jones thing or an Adele thing, where it's primarily, if not only, just a piano and the vocal? It's a matter of taste. I can't say, well, in that case, you should do +2 at 8K and it'll work every time, and use an 1176 compressor set at this setting. It all depends. It really does. In that particular setting, you probably wouldn't want the piano to be overly bright, like, Elton John bright. You'd want it to be rounder and mellower, and maybe have a little bit of top end on the vocal, a little bit of air, which is usually like 8 or 10K. But it depends on the singer. If the singer is naturally sibilant, you don't want to put a little 8 or 10K on her, assuming it's a lady in this case, only because I used lady references. There's just no way to tell you. I could walk into a control room with you mixing something, or, you could send a song and I would say, oh, I would try this, but it's a matter of personal taste. It really is. It's like telling a painter how to paint. You really can't. You can learn technique, but the techniques are applied differently to different types of paintings. If you're doing a landscape, you want daylight, and daylight, you want to emulate daylight, and daylight dictates the shading and the shadows and the skin tones, which I'm a little orangey today. And the same landscape done at dusk would look completely different. So it's just so hard to give you good answers to these, but I'm going to create more questions and I'm going to give you answers. How's that? Aren't you glad you asked me now? How forward is the lead vocal? Well, again, it depends on the song. If it's a rock song, maybe not as forward certainly not as forward as it would be for, like a Lady Gaga ballad or, any kind of ballad. The voice is just front, center, and like you want it right there. Here, let me move a fader and show you. So the lead vocal, it depends. Is it a fast staccato kind of vocal delivery where you need to boost a little top end or maybe a little even high mids, somewhere between 2,500 and 5K. So you get a little bit of edge that normally by itself wouldn't be all that pleasing, but in the case of it's like a machine gun rapid fire vocal, and you need a little bit of edge on it to make sure that the consonants are heard well. But as an engineer, you don't even think about those things. You don't think about, I need to add edge to make the consonants heard well. You just instinctively dial in the right thing because you know that's what it needs. But I don't remember too many times where I thought, I better dial in some edge because it's a rapid fire, very staccato vocal. So it's just a matter of doing it until you instinctively know. How far back are the harmonies? Depends. What kind of harmonies? Shh, don't tell Kip. Here, Kip, I'll answer the question for you. And there's your answer right there. And now it's back to Mikey's home studio. There you go. How far back are the harmonies? Well, it depends. Is it one harmony? Is it just one person singing, like a third or a fifth above the lead vocal, just for a line in the chorus, just to accentuate something? That would probably be panned right down the middle. And do you want that person to sound like, Keith Richards coming up to a microphone and singing, ouch, with Mick Jagger, where they're both in the same mic together on stage? Because that would be one treatment. If it's something where you want that background vocal to be like a hint, a haunting hint, if you want it to be more suggestive, I guess, maybe, then put it further back and you would add some reverb to it and you wouldn't have a lot of top end on it. If you want it to sound more forward, then you would probably give it similar EQ and similar reverb to the lead vocal so it sounds like they're in the same place, possibly even on the same mic. So it depends. Is it, think of the Doobie Brothers minute by minute. There's, a harmony from whatever era that was, late 70s, early 80s, something like that. But that was a group of guys, probably doubled, possibly tripled, probably panned somewhere between 10 and 2 and full left and right. It depends. If you've got 3 groups of 3, I would probably go wide and then treat the center ones differently because things are quieter in the center. So I would probably give the one in the center just a little more top end or a little more edge on the vocal and possibly even a little less reverb on the vocal. And if I gave it reverb, I would give it stereo reverb that goes out to both sides equally. Whereas I might take the vocals, the background group that's on the left side, or right side, if you're not looking in reverse, and pan the reverb opposite. and then do the same thing for the vocal over here, pan the reverb opposite. That way it gives you a sense of space. If you take both sides that are split out to the far sides and give them both stereo reverb, you create more of a giant washy room, which sometimes can be very effective, sometimes it's completely undesirable. It's a matter of taste, and it depends. I already covered panning and reverb. What type of reverb? Honestly, anything goes, and I am not fully aware or have I used many of the great plugins that are out there nowadays. I like Chromaverb. A few of the settings on Chromaverb, and honestly, I haven't touched it now in like 2 or 3 weeks, and I can't remember. That's what comes stock with Logic. And I have found 2 or 3 of the settings in there that I went, wow, that's really good sounding. They were really good sounding for that thing that I was mixing in that moment. They may have sounded completely horrible on something else. I've got the EMT plates from Abbey Road, and you got to work pretty hard on those to make them sound good on a lot of stuff, is my experience. Although I've, had countless, literally many hundreds, if not many thousands of times that I've used real EMT plates that, for my money, sound better than the Waves Abbey Road plates. But the Waves Abbey Road plates sound pretty good. They don't quite have the sizzle that I remember, and again, this is 25, 30 years ago. The EMT plates I had in New York had really nice top-end sizzle on them. But EMT plates do get old, and they oxidize, and they lose some of the top end. So you need somebody that knows how to recondition them or refurbish them to literally open up, take off the box. It's in a wooden box. Take off the side, and they polish it. They use some kind of something like a, WD-40 or something, and super fine steel wool is what I've been told. I've never seen it done. And they take off the layer of oxide on both sides, and then they have to remove the WD-40. The plate is suspended at each corner with the spring, and they can actually tune the plate by adjusting how many foot-pounds of pressure or whatever joules of pressure. I don't know what the hell they measure it in. But you actually tune the plate by adjusting the tension on the corners. There's a transducer in the plate, and there is a pickup on the plate. And so the two move apart. Actually, one of them is stationary. The other one moves to the outside. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that they're like felt pads or something that are on the bar. There's like a round dial. It looks like the thing that you'd find on a submarine door that you open up, but it's about yay big. Sits on top of the wooden box. And you turn that thing, and it then, hold on. Oh, I was going to reach for my ruler, but it's behind the green screen. Anyway, as you turn the thing with the pickup on it and the felt pads moves farther or closer to the transducer, which causes the vibrations in the plate. So that the farther away things are, the more plate there is to reverberate. Bottom line is, my default starting reverb for vocals, typically, not 100% of the time, typically is like half a second to 3/4 of a second, maybe a second, on rare occasions, a second and a half plate with some bottom end rolled off, probably a little top end added if I'm using the Abbey Road Waves plugin. I know on the Waves plugin, they've got 4 plates, A, B, C, or D. And I thought I fell in love with plate D, and then I realized, no, I fell in love with it for that particular thing I was listening to. Then I tried it on a vocal, and I liked plate B better. But I only liked plate B if I drove it a little harder and then shortened the time down. So that's what I'm saying, is everything is contextual, and it all depends. There are no magic answers for recording or mixing. And what type of reverb? Man, oh man. Like I said, a short plate is my default starting place. I'll throw that on something and I listen to it and go, yeah, it sounds pretty good. And I'll leave it. Maybe I'll lengthen a little bit. Maybe I'll shorten a little bit. Maybe I'll roll off a little more bottom, add a little more top. All those things come into play. Then again, sometimes I listen to it and immediately know. I'm talking like I did this yesterday, but I'll listen to reverb on something and go, nope, I'm not going to be able to shape that and make it work the way I want. And so you jump off of that and go to something else. At my studio in Florida, we had 2 live chambers that were actually 2 rooms side by side, built to the same dimensions as an elevator shaft, and they were about 2 stories tall, and they had a sloped ceiling on it that was at like a 45-degree angle, and Italian plastered walls, everything, concrete floors and Italian plastered walls and ceiling. And we had Bose speakers, the ones that, do I have a Sharpie in here? I know. I'll use a contract. Did I mention I don't love lawyers? So the Bose speakers, if I remember from a long time ago, they were like home stereo speakers. And this is a top-down bird's eye view. And the sound kind of radiated out from the front and the sides. I can't remember if there's anything on the back. And they had like little 3 or 4 inch speakers embedded in. But we had it hooked up to like a 50-watt Crown amplifier to each one of these. So each one of the chambers had its own amp, had its own Bose speaker in it. And the sound would come out and just splash around the room. The angled ceiling made it more irregular, obviously. And then we had, I think it was an Electro Voice microphone that was suspended from the ceiling. And we would adjust the distance of the microphone between the microphone and the speaker. And if the chamber sounded too long, we would throw moving blankets on the floor of the chamber, trying to get those moving blankets well balanced between 2 rooms. And it had soundproof doors on each chamber, but you could open them up and let chamber A bleed into chamber B. So there were all those variables, but those chambers work great sometimes. Listen to the Melanie Ballroom Streets record. Melanie's the artist. Ballroom Streets is the album. That's the one I did live in the studio with 30 people, same 10 songs or whatever it was, recorded over and over for like a bunch of nights in a row, and then we just cut together the best sections and then did quick mixes of everything. But you will hear the live chambers all over that record, and you'll hear that I probably used too much of them, frankly, because we were under such time and budgetary constraints mixing that record that we couldn't spend 3 hours balancing the chambers. So I would just lower the amount of signal I was sending to the chambers, hoping that I wouldn't overdrive them and get a really long decay. But I wasn't as successful in that endeavor as I would have liked in many cases. So, and at some point, about halfway through the record, somebody dropped off an EMT 250, which is a digital reverb, a very, very early digital reverb that, I don't know, it's like, I want to say $40,000 or something ridiculous back then. It was a lot of money. The thing stood about 2.5 feet tall. We called it R2D2 because it had all these levers on top, looked like a little robot. It was probably the state-of-the-art reverb at the time, so you will hear on some of the songs that I mixed later, there's more reverb or different reverb. That's because the EMT 250 showed up for free. Somebody just said, here you go, try this, and they were hoping I would love it so much that I would buy it, but not for that kind of money. So that's that. Let me go back to the list of questions. Why delay instead of reverb? It depends. It's all contextual. I don't even know if I can answer that question well, to be quite honest. I'm trying to think of cases like things, and then there's the combination, of course, of delay and reverb and pre-delay, all these things. I mean, it's just, you can't answer this in a show or in a minute or an hour or a week. took me years, probably 5 years of sitting behind a console all day, every day, often for, 16 to 20 hours a day before I really felt like I had a grip on this stuff. And I had a year before I sat at a console, learning from some of the best guys in the business. But percussive guitar parts, like chicken picking guitar parts, can sound good with delay, but how do you use the delay? You don't want it to be a sloppy delay that makes it sound offbeat. So you want to be timed to, the rhythm of the song, but you might pick like a half note delay and it just sounds too long. And if there's enough of it, it'll make people turn their heads and go, what's that? You don't want that. You want it to give a sense of making it sound retro, maybe, trying to simulate what an echoplex would do, or early tape delays. And obviously that involves a certain amount of feedback, so you get the womp, 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 womp. Other times you may want to take a lead vocal that just is a little wimpy. And they used to call it ADT, automatic double tracking. I don't know why they called it that. I guess because it wasn't a person going out and singing over their own vocal. But, a short delay, something really short, like 35 milliseconds or 50 or 75 milliseconds, depending on the song and the tempo. And is the vocal very staccato? If it's legato, a delay probably won't work unless it's a fairly long delay that's really loopy, but you don't want it to loop infinitely. You want to go, wow, and die away pretty quickly. So it gets a sense that becomes an effect and not a simulation of a room so much. So all these decisions are so contingent on what the song is, who the singer is, what the part is like, what key it's in, what tempo it's in, and what you want the listeners to perceive. Remember I mentioned mixing with intent? When you sit down, you should have some sort of vision for the song. It's like, I want this song to be a rock song with attitude, or I want it to be a ballad that just is so emotional that it melts your heart. Reverb is a really good tool for adding emotion in the context of a sappy ballad. I don't know why that is, but it's just something that I've noted. How much sibilance is okay? Honestly, I don't know if any of my engineer producer brethren would agree with me on this. There were many times that I left a slightly sibilant vocal on the record because in the context of that song, it just sounded right to me. So I didn't apply some hard, fast rule. Speaking of hard, fast rules, I must have a rock star. There are times, if you don't notice the sibilance, if it's not the thing that makes you go, what's that? It might be okay. It's kind of like finger squeaks or strings on fingers on a guitar, especially an acoustic guitar. There are times that adds legitimacy and reality and authenticity to a piece. There are other times where it's obnoxious and it makes you want to, throw your turntable across the room if you're violent. Anyway, I've been asked this question before. I think Andre may have asked me, if you're a guitarist like Andre and you're doing something like a Gypsy King style ballad or a classical piece on a nylon string guitar, but on the wound strings, you're getting some fret and finger and squeak. Excuse me, there's my daily rock star burp. You can do stuff for that. You could do, use compression that is EQ driven. I can't think of the name of it, but there are compressors that have like a 6-band equalizer built into them, and you can kind of draw where you want the compression to take place. So if the player goes to, a G string and that happens to be a particularly offensive note with the squeak, you can find out what the center frequency is of that squeak, and you can tell the compressor with something fairly gentle, probably like a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio, to take that and just duck that down, but not affect the rest of the tone, so that you're not affecting the rest of the tone of the guitar. But even if you're an expert engineer and you do that, somebody who's been playing it their whole life, like Andre, would be sitting in the control room next to me and go, I don't know, Michael, it just doesn't sound like it should. Well, yeah, and he'd be 100% right. It's like, do you live with the squeak, which is a natural part of the instrument and the human being playing with it? Or do you take the squeak out because it can be a little annoying, and then the person who, has that $20,000 extremely beautiful sounding guitar and knows the sound of that guitar is going, it just doesn't sound like it should. I would probably opt to get the squeaks out. Reason being, and there's psychology involved in this, if you get the squeaks out, it's going to be more appealing to the consumer, the person listening at home, who's going to play something like that on big, beautiful speakers or wonderful sounding headphones when they get home from work and they've had a rough day on the trading floor at the stock exchange. They're all stressed out and they come home and they put Andre on, and maybe they light up a fatty or pour a glass of wine or pull out a six-pack, who knows, but they're kicked back in their chair and they're listening. And if every, fourth note is they're going to listen to something else. So I would make the argument, the psychological argument, that I would rather have the Andres of the world. I'm not picking on you, Andre, you know that. But I would rather have the Andres of the world be less satisfied with the tone of the instrument for them, even though their name's on it, it's their beautiful $20,000 guitar. I would rather have more consumers love it. Reason being, the more they listen to it, the more they will tell other people about it. If they're streaming it, you're going to make more money from streaming. You don't want them to be turned off by it because you want them to love it and tell other people. So you have a choice to make. These are the things that would go through my head, more in the production capacity than engineering capacity. But I would think, who am I trying to make this record for right now, this decision I'm making? Am I making it so that more people will love it and tell their friends? Or am I making it to make the artist I'm working with happy? Hopefully you can find a happy medium, but you can't always. Sometimes you have to pick or choose. So how much sibilance is okay? If it's not making you hate it, it's probably okay. Back in my day, we had to worry more about sibilance as far as radio went, because sometimes, they just squash stuff coming out of the broadcast centers for radio stations. And then when, oh my God, I remember it wasn't so much with the Aphex Oral Exciter, but when the BBB Sonic Maximizer came out, there was like an industrial strength version of that radio stations started strapping on, their stereo output going through the transmitter out through that giant antenna. And if you had something that was acceptably, that's the phrase I'm looking for, acceptably sibilant, because it happens in real life. People say sibilant things. But it's got to be acceptable. It can't be distracting. That's where I draw the line personally. So I would have to, once the BBB or BBE Maximizer came out and radio stations started using them all of a sudden, I realized that stuff that I'd mixed when played on radio did become more sibilant. So I had to then back the sibilance down. So there you go. Again, contextual, you got to decide in the moment. And you have to look at it from all angles. How close to perfect pitch is required? Well, I come from let's just say I've worked, thousands of hours in the studio with Neil Young. He would laugh if he were sitting here next to me right now. He'd be laughing. Neil does not have perfect pitch by any stretch of the imagination. What he has is an incredible ability to deliver meaning to his lyrics by the way he sings his songs. If his pitch is a little off, he wouldn't care. He would rather go for the emotion and the meaning. So in that context, perfect pitch, not so much. If you are a diva, if you're Demi Lovato, you want it to be perfect. And I'm not talking about somebody, like a Demi Lovato vocalist who's bending a note for effect. I'm talking about they wouldn't want to be pitchy. But that's why they're going to bring in the best vocal tuner that money can buy to fix it. They would much rather, I'm certain, although I've never spoken to her engineer or producer, but I could tell you with certainty that those two people and Demi want nothing more than to capture a great performance. If they've got to pay somebody a few $1,000s to come in and tune that vocal so that it's imperceptible and you don't know that it's been tuned, they would spend that money in a heartbeat. That way they get the best of all worlds. They get the emotion, which may have a little pitchiness to it, and then they can fix it with Melodyne. We didn't have Melodyne back in my day. What plugins to have inline on the track and when to send to a separate bus? Okay, I'm pretty darn new at working with a DAW, but I do understand what a CPU and a computer goes through. So again, this is contingent and contextual. If you're working on an older computer that doesn't have a really fast CPU, in other words, central brain of the computer, and you don't have a lot of memory. If you don't have a lot of memory, then the computer CPU is going to have to do more work. Because as I understand it, the software will go into memory, into the RAM, and that almost acts like, maybe not almost, it acts like a buffer. If you don't have enough RAM available, then it's got to actually use the hard drive. One bit of advice I can give you is get rid of any computers, if you're using them for music, that have a mechanical hard drive. You definitely want to go with solid state drive. An SSD makes a world of difference. World of difference. It's like Volkswagen versus Ferrari difference. It'll put a smile on your face the first time you boot up a big ass program and it's up and running in like 4 seconds versus waiting a minute and a half. That'll make you happy. So every time, let's say, I'm trying to think of something that I like. Let's say you've got a Reverb program. Reverb takes quite a bit of central of processing power. A lot of math going on in Reverb. So let's say that let's say you're Billie Eilish, and you've got, like 40 different vocal tracks. That's how she gets that beautiful lush sound. And you're kind of new at engineering or mixing, or you don't really understand the drill on CPUs and stuff, even though I'm pretty new at this stuff in the digital world. It certainly makes sense to me, and you should understand that by putting, let's say, Chromaverb on every single one of those 40 tracks, you now have 40 little robots working for you doing a ton of math, and each one of them is eating up a piece of the brain inside your computer. So you have to make a decision. It's contextual, and that decision is, will those 40 layered vocals, are they all going to sound like they're in the same physical space? Are they in the same hall? Are they the lead vocal and we want them to all have a very rich sound, maybe like a short chamber, going for the richness? If they're all going to sound like they're in the same space or on the same plane, then you might as well set them all up on a send, bust them out on send 1 and 2 if it's stereo. Bring it back to a pair of faders. That way, you're only using the processing power of your computer for one reverb robot. Okay? One reverb robot. So, that's a technical term for those of you who are wondering. So, by just sending out the signal from each fader that's got one of those vocals on it, you now have eliminated 39 robots eating up the processing power of your computer. All right? So in that context, it makes perfect sense. There are other times that you may want things to sound a little different. Well, on that same record, let's say that you've got the Billie Eilish record and you've got 40 vocals and they're all bust out to Chroma Verb set on whatever. But now the lead vocal, you don't want, and yeah, before I might have said those were lead. Let's say that they're like semi-lead background parts, very, almost always in the mix and supporting the lead vocal, and they're in there a lot. So you've got to think about, you want them to sound good. You want them to sound good in relationship, the front and the back aspect, or the outside or the inside aspect of the vocal versus the lead vocal. So let's say you've got all the backgrounds taken care of. Now the lead vocal, maybe on that you want pre-delay. Maybe you want the pre-delay to not be overly bright so that it doesn't register in the brain as, oh, there's pre-delay. But yet somehow the pre-delay combined with a different reverb, maybe you've got the short chamber on the backgrounds, but then take the lead vocal and send it to, let's say for the sake of argument, I'm not sure this is a good showing good taste or making a good decision here, but just for the sake of argument, let's say you want the lead vocal on Billie Eilish to sound very reverby, and even though the vocal is up front because you've got top end on it, maybe you've got something like a Neve 1073 or something that adds some harmonic distortion to it, maybe even you boost a little bit, 2.5K. And that brings it very up front. And now Billie's mouth is sitting 8 inches in front of your face. But you realize, well, that's just weirdly out of context with everything else that's going on in this really wet, drippy, reverb-soaked song. So now you want to keep Billie, maybe you leave her up there, but then do parallel compression and only put the reverb on the channel that's got the parallel compression going on. So that way you add some richness to her voice, but it's not happening when she says something like staccato where you hear maybe you're only getting it on the vowels because the compressor is rounding off the dynamics of the staccato stuff coming out of her mouth, and only that gets that reverb. But it needs a little pre-delay just to make the reverb back there a little bit more. I hope that makes sense. I haven't been looking at the chat room because I've been talking forever. Let's see. We're talking about butter. Okay. It makes some sense. Okay. Marion, this is not a slight on you at all, but for those of you who are more further down the technical road, maybe than Marion is, did that make sense? Hello, Pedro. Hello, Pedro. I'm at Westlake Studios in Hollywood. Lamar says it makes sense. That's good. All right. We've got, at least Pat and Andre are listening. We've got 15 minutes left. Okay, so do you guys want to talk? Do you want to ask me some questions? There. Now I can relax. I'm sitting outside on my veranda on the Big Island. Yeah, I think actually that console is a Neve. It's a not very old Neve. I'd say it's less than 7 or 8 years old, if I had to guess. What is an example of pre-delay? Best advice I can give you is when we're done today, don't listen now, or you don't have a hall pass, so don't listen now. But check out "Take It to the Limit" by the Eagles, and you will hear exactly what pre-delay is with a fairly long decay on the reverb. Stereo drum mix versus mono drum mix. Is there a rule that you use? I like things in mono, and frankly, I think people over stereoize. But I will say that virtually, well, let's say 90% of the stuff that I did back in the day had stereo drums. But tom-tom fills were more important then than they are now. Nowadays, there are a lot of records made where the kick and the snare and the hi-hat are it. Excuse me. So right down the middle for that stuff. If I were doing, I'm trying to think of the Ramones. If I were doing the Ramones, I would probably go for mono drums and my guitars not panned full left and right. But for the kind of stuff the Ramones typically did, I would say I would do my guitars at like 10 and 2 or maybe 3 and 9, but I wouldn't go full left and full right on those. But what I would do would maybe take some really short delays or a room reverb and send them to the outside to put the Ramones in a 2,000-seat venue that had concrete floors and probably tin walls and a bunch of beer stench and sweaty people, put them in the place where they belong by knowing how to do that stuff. Question from Dan Weber. Do you dial in reverb small space to a large and large to small? I try not to overdo it. Honestly, I don't know that I ever had a prescription for doing that. I think I instinctively knew when it was time to set up reverb, let's say on a guitar part. I would know where that guy was. You wouldn't want the guitar player, like doing a Nile Rodgers guitar part in a very dry corner of a carpeted studio in a record where everything else sounded kind of open and had some air and some room sound to it. So you automatically know, okay, well, what does the room sound? It sounds like a medium room. So I would just throw medium room. That would be my starting point. I wouldn't start small and go larger. I wouldn't go larger or start larger and go small. I would just go, okay, where's the rest of the band? Let's put Nile in the room with the rest of the band. Here, let me scroll up a little bit, see if I missed anything up there. Pre-delay is so there's a drum hit, and let's say you've got a 75 millisecond delay before the drum hit gets to the reverb device, whether it be a room, a plate, or software. And it exists. All the plugins, all the reverb plugins nowadays have a pre-delay. Back in my day, we actually used a tape machine or a standalone digital delay piece of outboard. But you want to delay the hit before it gets to the reverb device. Why do you do that? Sometimes it's for effect. Sometimes it's to put it in a room. Let's say that we're in an airplane hangar that is big enough to hold a 747. We're talking big friggin' airplane hangar. You walk in there and you clap your hands. It's not going to sound like that. And before it gets to the other walls, especially if you're standing in the middle of the airplane hangar and you've got, 150 feet in front of you, 150 feet behind you, and 100 feet on either side of you, the amount of time it takes from that direct signal to get to those walls so that then they can reflect off of there and then start randomly bouncing all over that room, causing reverb, that's pre-delay. So you can control the size of the perceived space that something is in by having pre-delay or not. So when you actually see, if you want to see how pre-delay doesn't work well, take a large concert hall program, large hall, and add like 50 to 100 milliseconds of pre-delay and a lot of it in the blend, and it'll be a cacophony. It's a train wreck of reflections. So rooms naturally have pre-delay. The bigger they are, the more pronounced and obvious pre-delay is. So if you don't have something, like if you have a plate, great example, Take It to the Limit by the Eagles. That was probably a mixture of EMT plates and the live chambers at Criteria. As a matter of fact, I know it was the live chamber because the day that I first stumbled in the place, I was sitting in the lobby. The live chamber was above the ceiling in part of the lobby. And I could actually hear Randy Meisner's vocal in the chamber. I'd never heard the song before. The record wasn't finished being made yet. But I could hear Randy Meisner's high vocal part in that chamber. So if they wanted to add pre-delay to that to make it sound like it was in a 5,000-seat concert hall, then they would have probably used something like an Eventide digital delay, or probably a beat-up old mono tape machine or stereo tape machine, quarter-inch for sure, in and out, and then you control the amount of pre-delay by changing the speed of the tape with a vary speed. There you go, old school. Can I go over sidechaining again? I am not truly expert on sidechaining. I used it more in New York when I was doing audio post work to duck music in the donut of a radio commercial than I used it in the context of mixing records. Honestly, maybe it's my own level of ignorance having not used it on records. There's so many ways you could use it. I mean, to use it like a radio, somebody mixing a 30-second radio spot would use it. In the context of a record. For instance, maybe there's a keyboard pad, but it's in the same octave and in similar timbre as the guitar part that's coming up in the solo. So if you don't want to worry about mixing the keyboard pad down when the guitar is playing so that they're not fighting each other, you could sidechain it and control it so that it automatically ducked the pad by, let's say, 2 or 3 dB when the guitar played. And when it was done, depending on where the release setting was on the compressor, it would come back up. So that's one way to use sidechaining. I know that on EDM they use sidechaining to it just like kills the attack of instruments. So every time an instrument hits, it sounds like a marshmallow to me. It's like hitting a marshmallow with a stick. It takes a moment to come back up. I don't know. I'm sure there are tutorials on sidechaining that are way better than what I just explained. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit. The UA emulations of EMT stuff is great. Well, Ken, I've got to ask, have you used actual, I'm not dissing you at all, but have you used actual EMT stuff to know? I mean, it may be great, but are you saying it's great because it sounds just like the real deal? Unfortunately, I got spoiled by the real deal. I mean, I had the 2 plates that Phil Spector had that were on all of his great records, and then they went to Phil Ramone and were on all of his great records. And then when Phil Ramone's studio closed down in New York, studio that I was the studio manager of, happened to get those 2 plates. So yeah, the last 2 years I worked in New York, I had the best plates money could buy, probably. Oh, good. You've actually used an EMT plate, so good. Hungry for marshmallows now? Oh, let's go back to the control room. There we are. Right. Dan Weber says takes a while to train your ear for sidechain, easy to use too much. It's almost a rite of passage that you need to go through with almost anything like reverb, delay, EQ, all that stuff. Do it to the point of doing it so it's overdone, and then back it down. And I go back and listen to stuff that I did like in the first 3 years of me sitting behind a console. Just I'm horrified by it. It's like, oh my God, what was I thinking? You just develop more taste and better judgment as time goes on. And you know what? Tastes change. Like, you don't wear the same style shirts or shoes or anything except maybe underwear that you wore if you're a guy. I know for ladies that may be a different thing, but for men it's either tighty whities or boxer shorts, and they don't change. You know what? I'm wrong thinking about it, because now men, they make those longer, like Calvin Klein looking underwear. But what I'm saying is styles change, fashion changes, the colors you would paint a house, the way a car looks, types of fabrics used in clothing, all those things change. So as an engineer and especially a producer, you need to be really in tune with those things that are changing, and you need to use the skills that you developed 3 years ago when you didn't know so much, but then you've gotten better. Every few weeks you keep getting better and better and better, and then you get to the point where you can just stay on top of the trends because you hear something, go, oh, I know how they did that. Not that hard to figure out. Also great to read interviews. I'm telling you, I learned so much from a magazine that I don't even think is published anymore, but it's called Recording Engineer Producer Magazine. And I read that thing. I couldn't wait till it came in the mail. And I would take that home and read interviews with engineers and producers that worked on giant hit records. And I would take a pair of 4311s that I had at home, and I would get in a prone position on the living room floor in my one-bedroom apartment with those speakers like out here just blowing right at me, turn it up almost to the point of pain, take the album cover, take a spiral-bound notebook, and just sit there and read the interview, listen to what they're talking about, and make notes. And I always kept that notebook with me. And when people weren't looking in my control room, had that thing down underneath the console in like a little magazine holder. And, you know, people would walk out of the control room to go grab a beer or whatever. And if I wanted to be able to say when they came back in, oh, remember that sound that so-and-so got on such and such a record? I can do that for you if you'd like. Oh, really? And I just studied it in 30 seconds by looking through my notebook, going, there it is. There's that Doobie Brothers snare drum sound. Wow, Lamar, you must be old like me, dude. REP was a great. I love that magazine. Now there's just so much on the internet. You know, magazines are almost irrelevant. Um, Tape Op Magazine. There you go. You know, they didn't return my phone call. I was trying to reach out. I thought Tape Op would make a great addition to the Road Rally. Um, oh, we're the same age. I'm a year older, Lamar. Well, welcome to senior citizendom. Um, I love magazines. Magazines are, you know, great bathroom reading. Yeah, we advertise an American songwriter. I like those guys. Yeah, you know, it's funny whenever, I still get several magazines in print editions. People laugh at me, but, you know, have I been known to take my laptop into the bathroom? Yep. Excuse me, not that you need a visual on that, I'm sure. Anyway, All right. Well, kids, what do we have left? 1 minute left. So, I was going to have Chris Mara from Mara Machines in Nashville, also the owner and engineer at what's it called? Studio 1979. There's a fuller name for it. Anyway, he was going to be my guest, but a family member is recuperating from something. I don't know anything more about it, so I don't want to guess, but he asked if we could push it back a week or two. So here's your job. It's Tuesday. Yes, it is, right? It's Tuesday. So I need ideas for Monday's Taxi TV. I could do, and it can't be anything too complex on the tech side. It's got to be something preferably that I can do by myself without spending 12 hours on Saturday writing up a whole show. It could just be Ask Michael Anything. But please, post suggestions either underneath this video in the comment area. That would be the best place for them. Ideas for shows. And I will see you guys on Thursday for another Quarantini. But I really need help coming up with a show for Monday's legit Taxi TV. All right? Feedback on submissions. We just did a song play thing the other day. Plus the fact, every time I do one of those, you know how much money I made in the last, not that I do this for the money, trust me, how much money I made from doing Taxi TV in the last 28 days. I saw the number right before I went live today. I made like $102.58. So a lot of that is because so many of the episodes we don't get to participate in because we play music, and so many people still have their music distributed by DistroKid or CD Baby or TuneCore. So we don't get to monetize it. Not that I do it for the money. You guys know me well enough to know that that's the case. Anyway, I will see you guys on Thursday. Please go into the comments under this. Give me some ideas for a show, all right, for Monday's legit Taxi TV. With that, I'm going to traipse off. I'm going to go to Netanya, Israel, which is, 30 miles north of Tel Aviv on the coast. Here we are, beautiful Netanya. Notice this, by the way. That is the ruins of a Crusader castle right there on the ocean. So imagine that, because those dudes built castles. Everybody occupied Israel at some point in time throughout history. So yeah, that was, I forget the name of this place, but my wife and I were there 2 years ago, I think. Great ruins. They have ballistas, the stone balls that they would fire out of the what do they call it? Not slingshots, those things, and they actually have a bunch of them that they found stacked up there. And while we were standing there walking around these ruins, some guy in a paraglider came down and flew right over us. And I got it on videotape. It was pretty cool. And then some like 50-year-old dude, we were probably 200 feet over the water up there on that cliff, but we looked down and there was some guy just walking out of the ocean, stark raving naked. So there you go. Catapults, thank you. Yeah, and the thing that goes into a catapult is called a ballista. I didn't know that until I read the sign. So that's it, kids. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. I will see you on Thursday. Don't forget to hit the like button. If you are not a regular, hit the red subscribe button and hit that little, here, I've got a visual effect. Hit that thing so that you get notified when we go live. That way you don't have to think about it or put an alarm in your phone. It just will track your ass down and say, hey, don't miss Taxi TV. All right. See you soon, kids. Bye-bye. The audience loves it.